If you enjoy our content and think this is important material, the best compliment you can pay is by sharing this with your friends and family. This helps us out a lot. Also, if you enjoyed today's program, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We would love to hear from you. Welcome to the Truth in My Days podcast, where we defend the Word of God against the challenges of men.
Hello, today we have Sonia interviewing John about textual criticism. This is the field of study through which we can know the original text of the New Testament. We are continuing from the previous episode today.
Does the textual criticism cause any other problems?
Oh, many of them, and as I said before, of different types. There's one category of problem, which is that it makes the Bible look stupid in places. For example, here from the Gospel according to John chapter 5, verses 2 to 7, we would read this. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Do you see a problem here?
Well, the invalid's answer is not logical. What does going to the pool have to do with getting well?
Well, exactly. Here's the problem. Here's an invalid, 38 years. Along comes somebody asking, do you want to get well? What should the answer be?
It should be yes, although I guess someone could say, well, maybe part of the invalid's disability includes some kind of mental disability, so he just says whatever strange things.
Yeah. You would expect that the answer would be yes. Yeah, maybe he could say no, though I don't see why he would. But the answer that he gives makes no sense. Do you want to get well? I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. What does that have to do with getting well? Why would he want to get into the pool? While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Like, why is someone going in ahead of him, going into the pool? What does that have to do with getting well? If he has to get into the pool to get well, why can't he just wait until the middle of the night when everyone else is asleep and get in? What difference would it make if somebody else is going to the pool or not? So the answer it makes no sense here. And you're left wondering what is going on here. Now, let me read it again, and this time, we'll be reading from the majority text. Okay? The one we read from is the critical text, the one that you get from mainstream textual criticism. Here's the reading in the majority text. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had.
Oh, so now it makes sense.
Now this man's answer makes perfect sense. This is why when Jesus asked him, do you want to be made well? And he explains, he's explaining why he can't be made well. He's there, but he can't get in the water. When the angel comes, stirs up the water, whoever goes in first is healed, while somebody always manages to get there before he does. His answer now makes perfect sense. But you remove this part. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool, and so on. For the second half of verse 3 and all verse 4, if you remove that, the answer makes no sense. Now, that passage is there in 99.3% of the manuscripts of the Gospel according to John. It's omitted, I think, in 10 manuscripts, that's all. And without it, it makes no sense. But what happens then, the critical text, it has it out. It makes no sense. Okay, to follow the diktats of 18th century German rationalism, that's taken out. The Bible's made to look silly. Now, what else? There are theological errors, a category we can call theological errors, theological problems, which are errors or changes that either obscure points of theology or lose important points. Remember, the defense of the critical text advocates is that no cardinal doctrine of the Christian faith is affected by textual criticism, and that's simply not true, as we've seen. The doctrine of inerrancy is not just affected, it is destroyed by textual criticism, mainstream textual criticism. But there's actually other doctrines that are affected. Maybe not completely destroyed, maybe not destroyed, but they are affected. One of these, for example, comes in John chapter 1, verse 18, where we read, "No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him." Do you see a problem here?
Well, when only begotten God is written there, it sounds as if God is created, like there was a time he didn't exist and now he exists.
Exactly. Here's the problem. Begotten. God is not, as God, begotten. Begotten indicates coming into being at a certain point in time, and God doesn't come into being at a certain point in time. He exists from eternity. He is from everlasting. Otherwise, he wouldn't be God, because he would then be a contingent being. If he has a beginning, then he has to have a cause, and whatever caused him to come into being would then jump ahead of him for the title of God. This is a huge problem, except that that's not actually what the New Testament reads here. If you read something based on the majority text, you read the majority text, it says, "No one has seen God at any time, the only begotten Son who is in the bosom of the Father." That then makes perfect sense, because Jesus as God is not begotten, but as man he is. Okay? And that's why we see passages where it talks about, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." Psalm 2, for example. So, only begotten Son, no theological problem at all. The only begotten Son in the bosom of the Father, the Son and the Son reveals the Father. Perfect, not a problem. But if you have the only begotten God, you have a huge problem.
Well, but Jesus is God, so, well, but still a problem because it's only the human part that's begotten.
Exactly. The Son is begotten. God is not begotten. Now, how do they try to get around it? The obvious way to try to get around it is to argue that this word for only begotten, monogenes, doesn't actually mean only begotten. And a scholar sometime back in the 1950s, I think, was floated this idea that monogenes actually shouldn't be translated as only begotten. Because he said it doesn't come. We thought it came from this root words, monos meaning only, and genao meaning beget. So only begotten. But this fellow argued that it comes from monos only and genos, kind. So unique or one of a kind. His basis for saying that is that there's one nu in the Greek word, one n in monogenes, and genao, to beget, has two of them. And that argument convinced some people, and it's been spreading to the point where the large majority of New Testament scholars will say, yeah, the word doesn't mean only begotten, it means one of a kind or unique. That's not correct, though. Subsequent scholarship has shown that many compound words coming out of genao, where it's compound with something else, drops one of the ends, one of the nus.
Well, okay, so then that means monogenes could come from monos and genao, but does that mean that it's not a viable possibility for it to come from monos and genos?
Well, the basis for saying that becomes exceedingly weak, because in addition to what I just pointed out, when they start looking at how it's translated into other languages, such as Latin, it's translated into the equivalent of only begotten.
Okay, but why do we care how it was translated into Latin? Maybe they also interpreted it as coming from monos and genao, and maybe they were incorrect.
Well, maybe they were, but these are people in the old days we're talking about, like 2nd century, possibly 1st century people for whom Greek, Koine Greek, was the living language. It was their mother tongue. They understood it much better than any scholar today does. They understood it, and then when they're translating into Latin, this is what they pick. Okay, they're trying to translate as accurately as possible. So if they're picking that means they saw monogenes as meaning only begotten. And then there are passages where it's clear that's what it means. So, and then the basis for against one of a kind is faulty. The only basis for saying that is to say that cannot come from genau because of the extra nu there. But when you see other compound words with genau, beget, dropping that extra nu, then the only argument against only begotten is gone. So you have no argument for it. You have no arguments against only begotten, and you have arguments for it. There's no reason to go with only unique, one of a kind. But here's why it won't work, even if you did do that. Yeah, let's pretend you could do that. What do you get? The ESV, for example, does that. And they translate it as, no one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. Now, here's first, the problem is the word for only in Greek. You know what that is. What's the word for only?
Monos.
Monos, not monogenes. But they have the only God who is at the Father's side. So you have two beings here. You have this God, and you have the Father. But we're told that this God is the only God. Well, if he's the only God, then the Father cannot be God.
Well,
so who's this Father then?
Well, unless someone could maybe say that it's because of the Trinity and our human brains cannot fully grasp the Trinity, and maybe in the Trinity there's a way for one God to be beside another person in the Godhead, but it's still one God, and also be the only God.
The problem with that would then be saying, if we're saying that the first God there is the Son, and the Son is God, he's not the only God. The doctrine of Trinity cannot have any of the persons being the only God. Okay, so it just does not work. Theologically, either way the critical text translators try to deal with it, it's not going to work. Now, they don't have to go through this problem because, in fact, this reading only begotten Son is in 99.6% of the manuscripts. The only begotten God is actually in only 0.1% of the manuscripts. There's no reason to go with that. There's no theological problem with only begotten Son because Jesus is not begotten as God, but he is begotten as man. There's a point in time at which he added to his deity human body and human nature and became flesh and dwelt among us. So as Son, he's begotten. Only begotten Son is a reference to his incarnation. So that reading has no problem at all. But if you go with the critical text on this, you have a huge problem.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but please join us for the next part tomorrow. Same time and same place. Thank you for listening to the Truth in My Days podcast with John Torse. We would love to hear from you. Please feel free to share any questions or comments you may have. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, MeWe, and YouTube. Simply search Truth in My Days as one word. Again, Truth in My Days as one word, no spaces in between. And you can connect with us. You may also visit our website for more comprehensive material and to learn more about our ministry. Our website is truthinmydays.com. Thank you.